not making mistakes is what it takes to win that race, and positioning yourself for the final few laps. The 500, it's an endurance race that's turned into a shootout over time. So you work for 2 weeks and 500 miles to position yourself for the last lap. So it's a 500-mile chess match, really.
There's a very short list of people who sit in the boardroom in the morning, making payroll decisions, managing sponsor relationships, setting the strategic direction of a company, and then strap themselves into a 230-mile-an-hour race car in the afternoon. Our guest today is one of them. He grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, the city that hosts the greatest spectacle on earth, the Indianapolis 500. For an Indianapolis kid with gasoline in his veins, the race isn't just an event, it's a calling. He hires the engineers, he approves the budgets, he signs the sponsors, he sets the strategy. And then on race day, he sits in the machine his decisions built and drives it at 230 miles an hour in front of 300,000 people. That's not a hobby. That's a leadership philosophy made physical. In 2012, he made a bet. He co-founded ECR and got in the car himself. Since then, wins, poles, championships hunted, and a roster of drivers who went on to become household names in the sport. ECR didn't just survive as an independent, it thrived. In a sport where independent teams are slowly being swallowed by manufacturer programs and private equity, he and his team have stayed competitive and rooted. So what does it actually take to build something that lasts in a sport that's moving faster than ever? Let's find out. Ed Carpenter, welcome to the show.
How's it going?
It's so good to see you again. I think the last time I saw you was probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Our kids grew up together for a little while.
I'm doing the same thing. I think you're doing a little something different, but it's good to see you again.
And now they're getting ready to go off to college.
I know. Time flies.
It's absolutely crazy. I know you're a humble guy. And so I want to kick this off with a few highlights. It'll be kind of the thread for our chat today. So if we go back and look at, you've collected 9 wins across each type of track in the series. 12 of the team's 14 Indy 500 appearances, you've had at least one car in the front 3 rows, including 9 front row starts, I think it is, over time. And this is going to be your 23rd year in the Indianapolis 500 as a driver. You've had 3 pole positions, 2013, 14, and 18.
Correct.
Does that sound right? You're going to get another one this year. Go for number 4 this year.
Certainly trying.
So you're the 10th driver in the 100-year plus history with 3 or more poles. That's absolutely insane. Tied for 8th on the all-time list, which is include over 800 drivers. And you have led at least one race for 15 of the past 16 consecutive seasons. That's pretty amazing. So I think I want to start off with, you grew up here in Indianapolis, and I think the racing industry is so complex to most people, right? A lot of us can pick up a hockey stick or a basketball. But when you were a kid, when did you first, before you even got into racing, when did you first think, I want to do that? I want to be in the Indy 500?
Well, I mean, my life really took a turn. My mom married, what I call my dad, but stepdad initially when I was 8 years old, and our family ran and operated the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Indy Racing League, and then IndyCar as it became. So I was really married into the sport, and that changed my life, and it introduced me to this sport. That's when I started racing when I was 8, right when my parents got married. So it was kind of a love at first sight type of thing. I started in quarter midgets in 1989. Won my first 5 races, which probably set the hook pretty hard. But if I told you when I was 8 that that's what I wanted to do for a career, I'd be lying, because at 8 years old, you're not thinking about that. You're just having a good time and
fun.
Yeah, enjoying every day. No cares in the world. But that's for sure where the passion for what I do started. When I started thinking about it as a profession was, late 15, 16, when I was kind of still in, youth, call it youth sports, youth racing, and looking at what was next, and having some family discussions of like, okay, is this something you want to keep doing? And the answer was yes. And then as a family, we kind of mapped out what our options were and what that looked like and how school fit into the equation, which was a challenge for me at the beginning. So it was around kind of 17 where that process started changing this is the sport that I play and love doing, to this is the sport that I love and I want to find out how to make this my career.
So for those of who are familiar with a quarter midget versus like a shifter go-kart
Yeah.
or something, so what's a quarter midget?
I mean, there's really two entry points into racing. One's go-karts, which is probably more common now, in IndyCar anyway, and quarter midgets. So they're similar. Like, they use the same tires, in some cases similar engines. The biggest difference is quarter midgets primarily only race on ovals. Go-karts primarily race on road courses. Quarter midgets have a roll cage and seat belts. Go-karts don't. But from a rule set at the basic level, they're very similar. Both you can start at 5 years old, and really, quarter midgets you can only race until you're 17, 18. Go-karts you can race for a lifetime if you want. But those are the two entry points. I think I'm the only guy in IndyCar now that started in quarter midgets rather than go-karts, but those are kind of your two entry points into the sport.
So if I had an 8-year-old and they're interested in racing, what would I even do? Like, what's the investment for a quarter midget today, roughly?
I don't even know. It was so long ago from when I started, but I imagine your initial investment, for the cars would probably be $10,000 to $15,000 would be my guess, to kind of have a car ready to go. I may be on the low side there. That doesn't necessarily factor in. You can always throw it in the bed of a pickup truck. They're small enough to fit in the bed of a pickup truck, but people have trailers and, pretty big trailers now. The sports at the youth levels evolved a lot since I graduated from it. But it's an expensive sport for sure.
And then you have to qualify still? Do you literally just call up where a race is going to happen and say, I want to come qualify?
Yeah. I mean, at the youth level, there's clubs like any other sport. I would say it's more like a travel sport.
Yeah.
For soccer, hockey, baseball. But I would say it's a pretty welcoming environment. So there's clubs, there's shops that obviously sell everything. That would be your first start. Even though I came from quarter midgets, if my kids were going to race, I would put them in a go-kart. Mark Dismore has Comet Kart Sales and owns Newcastle Motorsports Park, and that would be my first call, would be to him, be like, hey, I want to get started, and they have everything you would need to get started and be able to lead you on the right path to getting going.
How so doing that as a kid, travel sport, and you mentioned school. Are any of those kids today homeschooled, or how hard is it to keep up with because you're every weekend you can be leaving on a Friday morning, coming back late Sunday night, or?
Yeah, I mean, racing's pretty interesting. I'm an outlier as a college graduate. You'll see, depending on what a kid's goals are, whether it's Indy 500 or trying to go race in Formula One. There's definitely some of my peers that probably didn't graduate high school. Kids will leave home and travel the world, chasing this dream. So it's, it's not something that I would recommend to my kids, but a lot of guys kind of get on with life pretty early. Christian Rasmussen, that drives for us, he's from Denmark. He moved over to the States when he was 16. And really started his professional career pretty young. So there's a lot of ways to do it. But for me, college wasn't a choice. It was a requirement, which, I didn't fully understand as an 18-year-old that wanted to just focus on racing
Right.
and get on with my career. But thankfully my parents were a lot smarter than me at that point, and, they made the right decision.
So when did you graduate out of quarter midgets? Did you go to Indy? Is it called IndyCar Light?
Oh, no, there was a lot of time in between that. So my last year in quarter midgets was 1996. And then I got into kind of USAC midgets, Sprint Cars, Silver Crown, competed in those series from 97, and through 2003, which is also when I made my first IndyCar start. I didn't get to Indy Next. It was Indy Pro Series back then, which is the minor leagues of IndyCar. I started in that full time in 2002, but was still racing the categories below that as well, all while in college.
That was while in college. So
Yeah,
you got your
I
first
graduated
IndyCar.
from Butler in 2003. So I graduated May, I don't know, 12th or 13th, I think was the date I graduated in 2003, and won the Freedom 100 in an Indy next car on May 15th, which was also my first date with Heather. So, that middle of May 2003 was a really important time in my life.
How did you meet Heather?
So Heather was a nurse at the time working with IndyCar series. So I actually met her out at the track. The Dr. Hank Bach was the medical director for IndyCar, and he was good family friends of ours. And he had initially tried introducing us in like August of 2002. I had a girlfriend at the time. She had a boyfriend at the time. And then kind of started talking in May of 2003, and we were both single at that point, and
that's awesome.
Never looked back.
So she thought your racing shoes were cool. I just saw some new racing shoes that Bree was taking to the back there with red laces.
I don't know if she thought it was cool or not. So she was a nurse at the track in 2003. I was just a Indy Next driver. And I remember I had to go to Kokomo to pick up a helmet, and that was one of my first pickup attempts, was trying to get her to go on our drive to Kokomo with me, and she's like, "I'm working," and I'm like, "Who cares? Like, no one's gonna notice if you're gone." And she stayed at work, and I went to Kokomo and got my helmet, and then about another week later, got on our first date.
That's awesome. So back then, what was your mindset with your career? Was I'm going to be a race car driver for my entire career and then do something else after that? What was your major in college?
I marketed a marketing major in the business school. Yeah. I with my family being so ingrained in the sport, I think I had a pretty realistic view at a young age of just how challenging the sport was. So I didn't look too far down the road. I focused on one step at a time as I was working my way through the ladder to get to IndyCar. So the first goal was just to get there. And, at the time I wasn't really thinking about how long it would last or even what I would do next. It was just, very singularly focused on getting from one step to the next, which, for me, I wanted to race Indy cars the whole time. I wanted to compete in the Indy 500. So I wasn't, in that phase of life, I wasn't really thinking much past to just getting to that next thing, which ultimately was Indy 500. If you would have asked me in 2004, which was my rookie year, if I would still be competing in the race in 2026, I probably would have said you're crazy. Like that's a very long career. But I've been very fortunate and blessed to have a long career and have people support me along the way and give me a lot of great opportunities.
So years ago, was his name, was it Derek Daly? Did he race in Le Mans as well?
Derek Daly raced F1 and IndyCar. He's Connor's dad.
Okay.
He may have raced Le Mans. I don't know the history of everyone.
So he told a story once of the first time that he was qualifying, or maybe just practicing. I think he was just practicing at the Indy 500 track, and he could not get past 200. And he goes back to the garages, and Mario's back there, and he's like, "How are you cracking 200?" It's not possible. And Mario told him, when you're coming down the straightaway towards turn one, and you're going to hit that concrete wall, so you just let off that gas a little bit. And Derek's like, or whoever it was, is like, yeah. He said, "Don't let off. It'll stick." So tell us about your first moment when you were out there practicing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a skill set required. I think to be a IndyCar driver, there's a mental skill set that's probably more important than just the natural God-given feel of a race car that some of us have. There's definitely a trust factor, which is essentially what Mario was conveying. IndyCar back then and still has a rookie orientation you go through. For me at the time, Indy Next raced on the oval, which was a big step because you're going 180 miles an hour. So you really get to know the track, get comfortable with it in a slower car. And then you go through the rookie orientation phase, which there's 3 phases that kind of works you up in speed so you don't get there too quick. But it's a process. I would say the first time is actually not as hard because you're young and, pretty courageous at that point, and you don't know what you don't know. And our cars are a lot different than they were in the 70s with downforce and all the engineering simulations that give you a lot of confidence. They were living in the Wild West back then, with no technology, and they were essentially test pilots. So it's a different time, but it's mind over matter at times. Like your butt's telling you one thing, and you've got to trust the engineering of what we do.
I had the privilege once of doing a 2-seater out there, and I had this vision that I was going to jump in this 2-seater, and it was going to feel like I was sitting in clouds and comfy and all the safety gear. And I felt like I was in let's say you take a tin can, like a soda can, and tip it over, cut a couple holes in it. And it was terrifying. And we were probably doing 180?
Yeah, 180, 185.
And so that's way less than 230, 230, almost 240.
45, 50 miles an hour down.
It's huge. And this thing, and the walls, right there next to you. So you mentioned like mental toughness. What are some of the things that you do in the racing sport around like physical preparation, maybe mental as well, but like physical preparation? Because if I go to one of these go-kart tracks and just do that thing for fun, my forearms, I'm gripping it so hard. Like I think you're not supposed to grip the steering wheel hard.
Yeah, you don't need to squeeze it that hard. I mean, there's times where you do at a bumpier circuit, but I think it's more, it requires more athleticism in ways than what people realize. Our cars don't have power steering, so there is a lot of weight and force and upper body strength to a point required. Same with the brake system. It's a hydraulic brake system, so it requires a lot of force to stop the car, especially on road and street racing. So we all train daily year round. I train daily year round just to do one race a year. And, there's an element of that that's probably overkill for me now, because Indianapolis, the only race that I do, is probably the easiest track we go to from a physical standpoint. The straightaways are 5/8 of a mile long, so you can really relax. But, there's an element of just being fit and prepared. The other element that people don't think about as often is, having that strength and structural strength to withstand the forces, not only driving the car, we're seeing 3.5 Gs, over 500 miles. And also when you're in the unfortunate event of an accident, you're seeing, 50 to 100 Gs impact. So just having your body be strong to hold itself together in moments like that is probably the most critical piece of being trained.
You mentioned some of the innovation changes like in chassis and I don't even know what some of the proper terms are, but the engine maybe as a whole and the chassis and talking about downdraft and helmets. Who is it? Simpson, I think, is a big...
Bell O'Reilly and Stilo are kind of the big 3 now. Simpson's still around. I don't think there's any IndyCar drivers wearing Simpson anymore.
Okay.
They kind of, as Bill Simpson, who founded that, he kind of pioneered driver safety. But as he sold his business and passed away, their emphasis went to other disciplines of motorsport away from IndyCar. But Bell's kind of the primary helmet provider now.
So when you first got into it, just say back in 2004, right? That was your first year?
Yeah,
qualified?
2004 was my rookie year.
So if we think about what the cars were like back then, and we leap forward to today, what are 2 or 3 things that come to mind from a technology advancement that is just a whole different world?
I would say the seat materials that our seats are made of have advanced greatly. A lot of energy absorption in that to protect, primarily our spines upon a rearward impact. Same thing with, helmets have come a long way from a concussion protection, but also intrusion protection. Before we had the windscreen, which is another giant safety innovation, there would guys been injured from debris or other cars ending up in the cockpit. So, a ton of driver safety things. Before my time, this soft wall safer barrier, which was innovated at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, was probably the biggest racing innovation ever, from crashing into concrete versus, it's a steel wall with these foam blocks behind it. So it's soft wall, as it was initially called, is not really true because it's steel. It's still very hard, but it moves and gives and disperses that energy as we crash. So between seating materials, headrest materials, windscreen, the way the racetracks are built with the walls, drastically changed the safety. And from I really came in at a great time where all that was happening. And the 5 years prior to me getting to IndyCar, you would see a massive amount of concussions, a lot of spinal injuries, and spinal injuries are all but gone. Concussions have greatly been minimized. I think racing of all contact sports, is by light years ahead of any other sport with concussion protocols, prevention, all of that. So it's allowed guys like myself to have long careers. I'm 45, one of the older guys doing this, but there's five drivers that are older than me attempting this year's 500.
So as I understand it, a lot of the technology that gets developed, to your point around the safety things, a lot of that technology makes its way into other sports. And I think some of that helmet technology has made its way into football, for example.
It has. It's happened slowly. Is it Bill Simpson that we were talking about earlier? I wore his helmets for a long time, and he sold Simpson and then had a company called Impact. And I've always been a giant football fan, and I was trying to talk him into doing football helmets, and he's like, it's a bad idea. Then NFL won't let it happen. And then he ended up doing it. And unfortunately, his company didn't really take off, but he did innovate and push the boundaries to where, the Rydell's and other, helmet manufacturers that were in that sport stepped up their game and kind of took the technology that he was bringing to it in. But yeah, you've seen it. I know from a lot of the seating material, that they've called some of our doctors and specialists. NASA's called us and been like, hey, how are you guys not having spinal injuries anymore? Like when they were looking at reentries with capsules and the forces that the astronauts have landing back in the ocean, even with the parachute. So there was technology that went from racing into space. And, obviously there's technology from the heat shielding and whatnot from their world that comes our way. But racing's always been an innovative sport, whether it's safety. The rear view mirror was invented at the Indy 500 in 1911.
Really? I didn't know that.
So there's a lot of things. Our cars, we're powered by Chevrolet. They don't look like what you drive on the road, but a lot of the things, when you see how much better fuel economy is on cars on the road, some of the underlying technology and software, and with fuel injection and shutting off cylinders when you're cruising on the highway, all that started in IndyCar.
So way back in the day, that track was a testing facility, right?
Yeah, it was proving grounds
for automobiles, and which goes back to our roots here in Indiana from an innovative standpoint, et cetera. Now it's grown to the greatest spectacle on earth. I think I want to come back to data in a minute.
Yeah.
Because I think that also impacts now as a team owner. But I want to go back to, so you're racing, and what year did you start ECR?
2012.
2012. And so your first qualification, 2004. So what is it? 8 years later, you decided to start a team. What happened between those years that caused your shift to think, I want to actually start a team, be a team owner versus just a driver?
It was really just an opportunity. I raced for Eddie Cheever in 2004, my rookie year. Didn't get retained after my rookie year. My family started a team, Vision Racing, in 2005 that I drove for until 2009 when it closed its doors. So in that time, a Vision Racing, I was a driver, but I was there on the ground floor when we built that team. Didn't have an ownership stake, but I was there and present. It's kind of like an owner's rep.
Dinner table conversations,
as a driver,
all the stuff.
So I really learned a lot through that phase. Learned a lot of things we did well, which was really culture, and learned a lot of things that we didn't do well, which was, really constructing the team and being engineering focused enough. But that failed in 2009. But through that phase, if you would have asked me then, like I would have hoped to drive and then someday take over running of that team. That didn't play out. This is a tough industry, very, very sponsorship driven, constantly fundraising, and we failed to keep the doors open there. That was a big crossroads in my career. I didn't really know when we closed that what was going to come next for me. And in the midst of us trying to make relationships and find funding to keep that team open, met a Stuart Reed, who's still a partner in the team today, and he was just launching a vodka company with Fuzzy Zeller at the time, and he wanted to get involved, but they didn't really have the means to do it yet. But ended up, doing a deal with them to get just enough money to do the Indy 500 with backing from their company in 2010, which kept me in the game for 2010. That May went really well. Ended up doing a couple more races with Panther Racing with their support. That year led into an opportunity to go drive for Sarah Fisher after she retired. And through that year with Sarah Fisher, Stuart really wanted to help me start a business and, kind of pick up where we left off with Vision. So, won my first race driving for Sarah in 2011, and right through that same window, kind of the opportunity to become a team owner presented itself. And I honestly wasn't really sure that I was comfortable jumping into that while still wanting to compete full time. But at the same time, as my wife and the rest of my family talked about it, it was one of those things where I felt like if I passed on that opportunity in that moment, I wasn't sure that it would ever come along again. So just kind of took a leap of faith and jumped into it. And, we're in year 15 now.
So you're describing as you're driving for various teams makes me think about, in racing and sports in the business world, it's always important to build relationships with our competitors because we just never know how these paths will weave and cross each other. How do you think about that? Like building relationships, along this path?
Yeah. I mean, that's been, other than driving the cars, that's honestly what I enjoy the most about this business. It really is, the drivers and cars get so much of the focus, but the success or failure of any IndyCar team really comes down to its people. We have right at 60 people here now, and the relationships matter, the chemistry matters, the culture matters, and that's something I've always enjoyed. I probably chose the wrong major. I probably should have done something more in organizational behavior type of things, because that's really what I spend more time on than anything. But relationships have always mattered to me. Even back to when I was driving for Cheever in 2004, I really tried to invest a lot of time into my crew and get to know them, not only from what their role was on the team and on my car, but just in life. And it was funny back then, Eddie didn't agree with that style that I had. And he's like, yeah, no, if these guys start caring about you too much, then they're not going to want you to go fast. They're not want you to get hurt. And I kind of viewed it the opposite, as if if they care and believe in me and want to do better for me, they're going to give me that extra effort. And so I've always tried to get to know not only my guys but other people, other teams, developing relationships, as you said, and that's especially become critical, as we built ECR, and whether it's attracting new people or just retaining our quality people we have, because there's, like any sport, there's if you've got a rising star, someone bigger than you is going to be trying to hire them, take them away, and I think retention is something that we've done really well at here.
Are there several moments, so leading up to the launch of ECR, are there several moments, well, let's go back to when you were 8 years old. So from 8 years old to starting ECR, are there one or two or three moments that pop out in your mind that that were major milestones or pivotal moments that if I hadn't done this thing, or if I hadn't shown up for this thing and met this person, or that took a relationship another level deeper, that these other string of events wouldn't have happened?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch, and some of them are, you don't realize at the time, but at the end of the day, winning matters,
Yeah.
so from a young age, you know, 15, I won a national championship in quarter midgets, which, sent the message that I was good enough to go to the next level. Those you aren't thinking about at the time. You're just excited to get in a bigger, faster car. Really the pivotal point really that allowed me to become an IndyCar driver was winning the Freedom 100 in 2003. I was driving for AJ Foyt right after I graduated college. It was, at Indianapolis during the month of May, won that race from the pole, and it was the first time Indy Next had raced there, and that really put me on the map for IndyCar team owners. So my stint with Cheever my rookie year was short, and it didn't go well in a lot of ways, but that opportunity wouldn't have presented itself had I not won that race, I don't think. So, that was a massive moment. And then there's other ones along the way where you just continue to establish yourself and find a way to survive and stay in the game. And, there's been many times in my career where, I thought I was going to be looking for what's next, which is a question I've never really been able to answer when people ask me what I would do if I wasn't doing this. And fortunately for me, I haven't ever fully had to test that out. And, some of it's success on track. Others, is to your point of some of it being at the right place at the right time, but also, I think hopefully being authentic enough as I've built relationships to be real and have people that have wanted to help me along the way. You listed off a lot of accomplishments and things that I do here on a daily basis. And, I definitely don't do any of it alone. I have partners that help me a lot, that have mentored me. And I've got people here under me that support me in ways that allow me to do this and still be able to drive a car at the same time. It's a team sport much more than anyone realizes.
Hi, I'm Mayor Chris Jensen. Growth doesn't happen alone. It happens where communities invest in innovation, talent, and possibility. Noblesville Economic Development is helping companies accelerate along Innovation Mile, one of Indiana's fastest growing innovation corridors. If growth is part of your future, start the conversation at choosenoblesville.com/innovate. Noblesville, all about you.
So you start ECR, and as I understand it in racing, there's certain things that you have control over, and there's certain things you don't. And so, and you help me with the terms, but like there's a standard chassis, or there's or maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 tire manufacturers, or whatever it may be. How do you go about deciding when you we'll start with the car, and maybe even get to the team and the sponsors as well. But when you're making a decision on how to put the car together, what goes into that decision-making process, and what are some of the things that you can kind of control, or that there's a shopping list over here where there's, a chassis manufacturer, for example?
That's been, an ever-changing thing. We talk about Indianapolis being a proving ground. Back in those early days, it really was, there was no rules. You would build something, dream something up, build it, and bring it to compete. As this sport has evolved and the world has changed, we've become more of a spec series. We're not a spec series, but we do have a lot of spec things. There was an era before my time, where there was Goodyear and Firestone competing, and there was Tire Wars. There was probably definitely more engine manufacturers, more chassis manufacturers. And as the competitions increased, the competition within that can be a good thing and a bad thing. It's definitely not good for parity, and you see that in F1. There's a huge, huge spread from the fastest car to the slowest car. Indy cars are very tight, and that's based on the rule set. But when you had that competition, there was always a clear winner and a clear loser. And if you didn't have the right manufacturers with you, you essentially had no chance of winning. So I think the direction they've gone has been really good. We all use a common car in Dallara. We all use Firestone tires. There's 2 engine manufacturers, Honda and Chevrolet. Hopefully there'll be a third on the way soon, which would be great for competition and marketing support. But within that, the biggest open area for real innovation in our cars now are the shocks, or dampers as we call them. That's the only thing that's totally unrestricted. Underneath the cars, from a chassis, it's a common supplier, but there's different components in there where, IndyCar manages the supplier base. So, for radiators, there's a couple choices for different things. There's different choices, but it's not all fixed. And then the shocks are really fully open for innovation and development still. And beyond that, it's really people and processes and maximizing the equipment that the series prescribes and working as a team to optimize and get the most out of what we have.
So when it comes to so now data, do you do things with wind tunnels, or is that the manufacturers?
Both. The manufacturers definitely, even though Honda and Chevy produce engines and cars, they provide a lot of engineering support, and they do a lot of wind tunnel testing. GM has a tech center in Charlotte where they have all sorts of capabilities, from simulation, wind tunnel, different other testing rigs for gearboxes and wheel bearings and you name it. But they do some of that. We do basically all of it as well. Not to do it over, but just to kind of dig deeper, dive deeper, refine more. They kind of quantify the cars for all their key partner teams. And then it's up to us to continue that evolution.
So then do those, let's say Honda, for example, or Chevrolet, whomever, do they have, let's say there's 15 cars with one certain manufacturer. Do those manufacturers have dedicated teams that are dedicated to ECR versus another team, or is it all in the same bucket?
On the engine side, yes. From a car side with Dallara, they're a supplier support. They have people at the track, that interact with us really just from a purchasing standpoint. With Chevrolet, they're our engine supplier and technical partner. Ourselves, Penske, and McLaren are key partner teams with Chevrolet, so we work a little closer than the other Chevrolet teams, or at a deeper level. But we have an embedded Chevrolet kind of chassis engineer that helps us and supports us, and then through that we kind of help them develop their toolbox, as they call it, with software and different tools that we use. And then each car has a engine tech that's with us all the time as well. So, for our team, we have at Indianapolis, we'll have four Chevy people embedded with us, all the time.
And so from a data and like telemetry standpoint, the amount of data you're probably collecting on any given lap, do you know how many data points you can collect?
There's over 100 sensors on the car, so we're essentially measuring everything that's important, real time, from the timing stands. If you're watching a race, you'll see all these little like huts along pit lane. It's kind of like mission control, group of engineers there watching everything. And then when we come in, they plug an actual download cable in and pull the raw data off the car.
So they're not collecting it via like Wi-Fi or something?
They are. It's coming over the air, but it's not as refined at that point.
But during a pit stop, they're actually plugging something in?
Not during pit stop.
Oh, okay.
In practice, they'll plug in every time and get cleaner data, because it broadcasts at a slower rate. You can't get it totally raw over there. But the telemetry is getting better and better all the time. But yeah, there's, we have six engineers per car looking at everything real time, and in practice or in testing, as we just finished up, that data analysis and processing all of that, is a big factor into making the next right decision and being prepared for whatever it is you're working on, whether it's race setup, qualifying, speed,
how much gas
comfort.
you have left.
Yeah, exactly. That's critical.
So is there Is there something that sticks out in your mind that like today you're able to see X, but you couldn't see that 15 years ago? Or like, are you building custom AI tools on top of,
Yeah.
this data?
At the end of the day, like at a basic level, we're looking at the same things we were 15 years ago. We're just able to see more and process it faster and at a higher quality. Definitely automation is entering our world in a big way. And a lot of that just, can process so much more, so much faster than humans doing it the old fashioned way. So yeah, it's racing's always been on the cutting edge of all that, and I think it still is today.
I was out the track last year, and there was an innovation panel, and so we can all geek out about the data and the telemetry technology and AI, all this fun stuff, but sometimes it comes back to good old fashioned human grit, and they were talking about how one of the racing teams was talking about how they discovered, and probably some years ago, but that they can turn an athlete into a mechanic, but it's hard to turn a mechanic into an athlete. And so they'd started recruiting from like D2 schools, like athletes to come into the sport, and that person changing tires or whatever, an extra 0.01 seconds matters.
It's definitely an evolution there as well. I would say from what you're saying really relates to pit stops. We'll have 5 to 7 pit stops in an Indy 500, and a second and gained or lost in the pits ends up being hundreds of yards at speed on the track. So it's something that was probably overlooked for a long time, but as the cars have evolved and matured and we're near the end of this current car, so we're getting diminishing returns on development now. So as we get into a phase like that, you see teams spending a lot more time investing in other areas, which could be pit stops for some people, but it's definitely an area that we've gone down to. Just we're looking for tenths of seconds, hundreds of seconds. It all matters on track. It may seem like an inconsequential amount of time with us talking about it, but it can be the difference between winning and losing. Right,
those photo finishes.
Yeah.
So I want to dive into this new charter system with team ownership, and kind of want to dive into these one at a time. As I understand it, there's a new charter system for teams, and the categories are around guaranteed race entries, that helps with the creation of resale value, exclusive financial benefits, and like long-term stability. Can we dive into that? Like, how has the IndyCar circuit changed with teams, ownership, how they're structured, that helps with the longevity, of the sport or the racing team owners themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, IndyCar, I view it's a major league sport. We're the top open wheel racing series in America, but it's structured way differently than other leagues. If you compare us to NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, those are all franchise-based, league-owned assets. It's hard for anyone to go start one. Like you can't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm going to start an NFL team." No, you've got to buy in, become part of the club. IndyCar didn't have that. We have a sanctioning body that manages the sport, but prior to the charter system, if somebody had the resources and wanted to go build a team and buy the equipment, they could do that. And over time, I think we all realized that we needed to change the model. What we do, per car costs tens of millions of dollars annually to keep it going. So we're constantly raising and looking for sponsorship, which we've got great partners here in Splenda and Java House and SlimFast. But we needed to do more to create more value for our teams. There's a group of teams that, Penske's in year 60, I think. Ganassi's in the 30s or 40s. This is 15 for us. But if you look back last year, there was a new team that came over from Europe, started an IndyCar team, Prema. They're already gone. So there's always been a lot of teams come and go. We talked about Vision Racing earlier. It was just hard to survive. And, some of that was due to the nature of anybody could start a team. Like we weren't protecting protecting our assets of teams and the role that the teams play as a stakeholder in this sport. So going to this system, we call it a charter system. It's different than a franchise system, but very similar at the same time. So now, we started that last year, and it's still evolving a little bit now. IndyCar's made some announcements in the past couple of weeks that, because there's 25 charter teams now. They had allowed for open entries still. They've modified the charter agreements, and starting in 2027, if you don't have a charter, you can't compete anywhere other than the Indianapolis 500. So that how much that's increased our value, will be determined, as charters transact, which they haven't really yet. But it definitely is increasing our value because, before, we'd spend millions of dollars buying cars and building a team. And, once it's much like, any car you buy at a dealership, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it depreciates in value. And
Right.
by the end of it, you're getting pennies on the dollar what you purchased it for at the beginning. Now we're creating something valuable there's a finite number of them, and if you want to get involved, it's going to require a purchase or a significant investment. So I think it's a massive step forward for the sport and providing more value, more stability to the teams to really drive some worth.
So IndyCar is an independent organization, self-governing organization, right? That was started how many years ago?
There's been, it goes back to the 60s or 70s, kind of when it transitioned in from USAC to CART to Champ Car to IRL
right.
to, there's 2 open wheel series, and then they remerge unification in 2008. But it's, we've taken giant steps forward at times and taken some steps back along the way. But, as we sit here today in 2026, I think the sport's in, for sure, the healthiest spot that it's been in my career. And, we've got a great TV partner in Fox who also owns a third of the sport now, and their investment's been critical. Our TV viewership's up 44% over last year, also all on Fox, which I think that's a crazy number. We still need to raise the floor of our viewership, but when you look at every other sporting property, nobody's seeing growth like that. So we're in a real ripe opportunity to take advantage of this and really grow our sport to new heights.
So I didn't realize that. So Fox owns a third. Is that of IndyCar or another entity?
Yeah, I've been Penske Entertainment, which is IndyCar.
And back in the day when I remember when CART launched, there was that big wreck in Michigan.
Yeah. The US 500
made that a little difficult.
Yeah, same day. They tried to go head to head against the 500.
Right. Didn't work out so well. So, all right. So from a team ownership, then, so you start ECR. This new charter system's coming about. How do you think about? Did you start with 1 car and you've built up to 3 cars?
Yeah. So when we started in 2012, we were a 1-car team. I was the driver. We had 2 chassis, about 20 people. Then we merged with another team, with Sarah Fisher's team in 2015. That made us a 2-car team. That partnership didn't work out, unfortunately. But we took on full ownership of what that merger was, and carried on as a 2-car team from there. So from that point in 2015, we've competed 2 cars full time for the full schedule, and most of those years we've run a 3rd car at Indianapolis.
And do you have a split seat philosophy? Is that right?
We have in the past. We don't anymore.
Okay.
For a while, as my role was changing and evolving, as we talked about at the very beginning of the conversation, I started in quarter midgets, built a career around oval racing. When I got to IndyCar, it was an all oval series with the IRL. So I didn't have a road course racing background. And as the series has changed, it's about 1/3 ovals and 2/3 road and street courses. My skill set wasn't strong enough for that discipline for us to win. So there, from 2015 until couple years ago, I was competing on all the ovals, and a lot of years would share my car with someone for the road courses. Starting last year, Christian took over that seat full time, and I'm just in an Indianapolis 500 only role now, which is good as we're growing and raising our expectations to finding our way to winning Indy 500s and being a stronger championship contender.
So what does the future look like now, do you think? So you've got 3 cars. Does it 6 cars? Does it stay 3 cars? Who knows?
Well,
4
with the
cars?
charter system, we have 2 charters. So for us to add a third full-time car, the only way we could do that now is to acquire another charter. So for the near future, we're a 2-car team.
Yep.
We'll continue to field an extra car at Indianapolis. That's for me at this point in time, but that won't last forever. So we'll see where it goes.
So here we are. Qualifications are getting ready to start for the greatest spectacle on earth. What are you fired up about? What's going to be new this year?
There's not much new this year. We have very few changes on the cars. But the competition is so close, to whether it's to win pole or win the race, it really, really requires perfect execution from every single decision you make on the setup of the car, every single pit stop, every lap from the driver. Not making mistakes is what it takes to win that race, and positioning yourself for the final few laps. The 500, it's an endurance race that's turned into a shootout over time. So you work for 2 weeks and 500 miles to position yourself for the last lap. So it's a 500-mile chess match, really.
I think we're probably coming to the end here. This stuff, these podcasts go so fast. I get so excited about. You can tell I didn't even look at my notes. I just get so curious and start asking questions. But I think before we go into some rapid fire questions to round it out here, if you fast forward to 50 years from now, and so you're 45, so you're still gonna be alive and kicking. You might still be racing in the Indy 500. You'll be 95.
I don't think so.
And what do you want to leave behind? What do you want people to say about Ed Carpenter, about ECR racing, 50 years from now?
I mean, I hope at that time as a business and an IndyCar team that will have won a lot of championships and won a whole lot of Indianapolis 500s. So as a team, that's my hope. From a legacy standpoint for me, I'd like people to look back and say he was a cool guy that did things the right way and was a fun guy to work with. So, other than that, I want my kids to be successful. I want them to be able to have healthy, happy, successful families, and someday, not just yet, enjoy grandkids and all the things that I see my parents really enjoying, as they enter into their retirement ages.
I love that. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day, right? Is family and
Absolutely.
those kids and the next generation, healthy, happy lives.
Yeah, and with that, hopefully, I don't have any kids that are driving, but hopefully some of my family will still be involved with this organization and carrying on that way. But at the same time, if that's not what they want to do, I'll be just as supportive of them blazing their own trail.
It's awesome. Are you ready for a few rapid fires?
Sure.
One word, multiple sentences, whatever you want to do with it. So what is one thing in your industry that you think people should stop doing?
Stealing people.
Talent.
Yeah.
It goes back to that talent.
Yeah, there's a lot of poaching.
What is one thing that you think people should start doing?
I don't know. I don't know that I have a good answer for that one.
If there was, if you could wave a magic wand and solve any problem in the world, what would that be?
We're talking whole world, not just racing?
Anything at all. Yeah, anything outside of racing.
As of today, it'd be nice if diesel prices would come down. I drive a diesel.
That's a great one. So is there anything that you're passionate about that I haven't asked you about today that you want people to know about you or your family or ECR?
My life's pretty simple. I'm here or with my wife and kids. Like being in the mountains, love skiing on the snow or on water. So, I love race cars and nature at the same time, which is pretty funny.
That's awesome. So how can people follow you, follow ECR? Where can they buy your swag?
I'm
How can
old
they
enough
support
that
you?
I'm pretty not good on social media intentionally. I like to be dark there. But the team is ECR Indy, kind of on everything. You can find everything you want there, from anything about our team, looking for a job, buying merchandise, who we are, our whole history. So ecrindy.com, and all our socials are the same tag.
That's awesome. All right. So you heard it there, ecrindy.com, ecrindy.com. Go there to follow Ed Carpenter, to follow ECR Racing Team, all kinds of cool swag. I saw some cool new shoes. Can we buy those shoes on your website?
No, those are fully custom for
Oh,
me.
man, those are only for Ed. That is not fair. All right. Those were definitely dope. I can't wait to see those out the track.
Yeah.
You're going to crush it this year. I feel it. Maybe this is a year where you bring home the checkered flag in the Indy 500.
Man, I sure hope so. I think about it every day.
That's awesome. It's going to happen. I can feel it in my bones. Ed, thank you for joining Innovate or Evaporate.
Thank you. It was fun.
All right. Until next time, we'll see you soon.